Hi there, and welcome to the May Look-See. As usual, there's a lot going on and many things we could talk about, but let's begin with a key word for the month. And the word I received when I asked for a keyword was tourniquet, which was accompanied by a picture in my mind's eye of the crank that we use to open and close the big windows in our greenhouse. So this caused a brief moment in which I thought, no, wait, a tourniquet is something that stops the flow of blood. Why am I seeing the crank that opens the greenhouse? It's this big long thing that you open the big windows with. So I got online and I did a little research into the etymology, like the history of the word tourniquet. And I found it goes back centuries. It came from Old English and I think some French. And it meant to revolve, to rotate, to move about an axis or a fixed position, to draw aside, to cause to turn, change, or transform, or to turn something on a lathe. So all of those things, that's tourniquet, the meanings of tourniquet: to revolve, rotate, move about an axis or a fixed position, to draw aside, to cause to turn, change, or transform, or to turn something on a lathe in order to shape it. So in the 12th century, it was used to indicate a change of course, to go in a different direction. So is this telling us that things around us are about to change course and go in a completely different direction? Or maybe we're about to change course in some important way. The medical use of a tourniquet is to stop the flow of blood to an arm or leg that has been seriously wounded. So does this hint at something in life that has seriously hurt or injured us and we need to stop the bleeding? Does it warn that someone's going to apply a tourniquet and stop the bleeding in order to save us? One of the other meanings from the 12th century used tourniquet to indicate grief or advantage. So the grief was due to something that had been inverted, turned upside down, or assumed a reverse contrary position that brought danger. It also pointed to a rout in battle, being absolutely, beaten, routed out. So are we about to lose a serious battle, or perhaps witness a serious battle in which someone or something suffers defeat? Tourniquet turned out to be an interesting word. So let's watch and see what develops this month. And I did see a few difficulties this month. Number one, to begin, I wanted to share that I've had a number of messages and dreams of a fairly disturbing nature. One that was extremely specific was on the morning of April 27th. I was doing some breath work and I had a clear and powerful vision that left me shocked. I don't think I slipped into a dream state, but even if I did, I was completely lucid and aware. In the vision, I was outdoors. The sky was gray and overcast, and I was looking upward at it and beginning to see what at first looked like a few drops of rain beginning to come down. I quickly realized it wasn't rain. It looked like particles of dust or dirt or some kind of pebbly material or grainy, stony material. The amount of this material increased quickly, and the sky became filled with a swirling shower of this stuff as the particles coming down became larger and came down with great force. The landscape of Earth was being pelted with this furiously falling stony material, and everything was being pulverized. The falling material was ruining many things, and suddenly fires started far off to my right along the horizon. I wondered what was on fire. But quickly, a second fire started, and then a third, until the entire landscape and horizon were on fire. And huge flames were towering everywhere, moving quickly. Before I had a chance to move or even think, a single large wave of water rose up from the left, curled over onto the flames, and put out the fire. I was so shocked by this vision that I woke. I wasn't really asleep, but I was like, oh my gosh. I stopped the breath work and I sat up to think about what I had just seen. I wondered if I had just seen the events that scientists would call a micronova. If this was a symbolic vision, it symbolizes something tremendously disruptive and destructive. If it was literal, it indicates something that would be destructive to the point of becoming an extinction level event. Either way, I felt something big and disruptive was very near. If something happens, keep your calm, stay centered. You can't make good decisions in a panic. Number 2, as I watch people who are watching Donald Trump, I have noticed several things. First, most podcasters, analysts, commenters, and ordinary people are judging Trump's every move to see if what he says and does conforms to their ideas of what it means to make America great again. Second, many of them complain that he's ruining the country, the money system, the reputation of the US, and he's lying to the people. Third, these podcasters, analysts, and commenters act like making America great again means returning to a way of life that is specifically tailored to them and the comfortable life they used to have. So I'm going to say the world I grew up in was very different from today. It was a time of Elvis, the Beatles, rock and roll, romance, riots, sexual defiance, the assassinations of JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., and RFK. Terrorists were taking over airplanes and cruise ships. The beginning of milk cartons showing a steady stream of children who disappeared and asking for help finding them. Major protests against the Vietnam War, letting go of the gold standard, the sudden printing of dollars, the sudden appearance of AIDS and then Lyme disease, the slow decline of religion, and the first hints of pedophilia, the shock of learning that the Gulf of Tonkin affair was a false flag committed by the US in order to have an excuse to go to war against Vietnam, the appearance of personal computers, and the first iteration of the internet. We do not want to go back to this world. It was quiet, but only because we were steeped in ignorance of who was running the world and what was happening behind the curtains. Podcasters, analysts, and commenters are using the wrong measuring stick to assess Trump if they think we are going back to anything that used to be. The country is not being ruined by Trump. Both the country and our reputation abroad were already ruined by the succession of presidents and politicians that followed the assassination of JFK. Those of us who looked below the surface and behind the curtains could clearly see what was happening. Government organizations were privatized and then sold to corporations. Private prisons were then built with laws passed to make it easy to fill those prisons. Manufacturing left and went to places like China and Mexico. Schools revised all of their curricula to be taught at less than sixth grade level. Ethics disappeared, and they were replaced by fraud that was everywhere and still is everywhere. People who want to go back to this are voting for a world of illusions, lies, and fraud, where real people suffered real hurt and injustice. The money system is not being ruined by Trump. It was already ruined by greedy, power-hungry men in 1913. Trump is revealing what is wrong and is trying to set up something that works and allows more control of the financial system in order to cut down on the fraud. I like the idea of a system that does not promote fraud, but giving the government a measure of control over our money. It means we will never get it back. The only good option here is to stay involved and pay attention to what is happening in the world. Trump lives in a world where there are 200 countries having 200 other presidents and prime ministers to deal with, all with different cultures, all with different resources, all having different money systems, and all believing in the fine art of competition for scarce resources, supposedly scarce. I see him, Trump, working in a very carefully structured way to pull the rug out from under the cabal of deep staters, taking apart the Zionists controlling Israel, giving a finger to the city of London and their financial networks, all while trying to keep the US from collapsing into revolt. I see Donald Trump trying to make America anew, trying to set up a network of relationships with other countries in which it's a win-win for all of us. Those who think we should be the ones on top, the ones controlling other countries, the ones getting a better deal than everyone else, need to think their entire approach to the future. We don't need to be on top. We need to be fair and honest. We don't need a better deal than we're willing to give. We need to repair fences in order to restore our reputation. We are already great. And even though Trump says and does things that make us cringe, he is the one doing the job that needs to be done. He won't be there forever, and we will move on. But for now, the situation is what it is. Number 3, a food war is heating up between Robert Kennedy Jr. and the left. A few days before Donald Trump took office, the Biden administration pushed through a brand new law that required labeling of foods in the grocery store. Who was behind this new law? The Americans for Ingredient Transparency. Americans for Ingredient Transparency was the group behind it. They sound like a nice grassroots group, but they are not. The group is a consortium of ultra-processed food companies, beverage companies, trade associations, and growers who produce food for those ultra-processed companies. The labeling they planned was to use big, bold, red, yellow, or green labels on every package, with the red labels indicating high-risk foods. Yellow labels were for medium-risk foods, and green labels for low-risk foods. What were the criteria for these risk levels? Foods high in saturated fats, salt, or sugar would get a red label as high risk. Yellow labels would be for moderate amounts of high risk, and green would be an eat all you want label. This tells us that the people who should know better are still pushing the narrative that saturated fats, salt, and sugar are bad for you. However, the body needs a variety of fats, including saturated fats. It needs salt for too many reasons to even mention here, and it needs sugars in the form of complex carbohydrates because the body runs on these sugars. Robert Kennedy and the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, people also want labeling, but they want a different kind of label that assesses nutrition, the chemicals in the food, and how much ultra processing has been done. They point out that butter is almost all saturated fat, and yet it's excellent for good health. But it would get a red high-risk label because of that fat. Diet Coke would get a green all you want to eat label because it has no fats, no salt, and technically speaking, no sugar, which is defined as white cane sugar. Bill Gates has come up with a whole new form of butter called Savor, S-A-V-O-R. It has no dairy in it at all, and it's made in a lab from carbon dioxide and a couple of other ingredients. It too would get a green label because it has no fat, no salt, and no sugar in it. It's just chemicals. So be aware that you are a child of the earth, and you need the foods that Mother Earth grows if you want to be healthy. Those foods carry needed frequencies that retune your entire system. If you see red, yellow, or green labels begin to appear on foods in your grocery store, be aware that the big food cabals and government are trying to tell you what to eat. And they have not been very good at guiding food choices in the past. In fact, it often looks like they've gone out of their way to make sure we avoid the very nutrient-dense foods that the body needs. Heads up. Number 4. Years ago, I read a series of books by Zecharia Sitchin about the Sumerian culture of over 5,000 years ago. And even though I was uncomfortable with some of what he said, actually a lot of what he said, I liked his idea of interpreting the Sumerian tablets just as they were written and not reading the tablets as if it was all myth and religious stuff. My interest in ancient history blossomed after reading Sitchin's books, and eventually I was led to the work of Professor Samuel Kramer. Kramer studied the cuneiform writing on the Sumerian tablets and became the world's expert on the ancient culture. Kramer's work was referenced repeatedly in Sitchin's books, and both of them talked about gods, temples, life, and relationships in Sumer. Kramer died in 1990, but before he left, he made some astonishing announcements about his own life's work and said it was wrong. He said he had been translating the writing on the tablets correctly, but some words did not have an equivalent in the English language. So he had supplied what he thought were reasonable translations for those words. However, late in life, he realized that the perspective and assumptions that provided a, quote, normal, unquote, framework for life in the 20th century did not provide a suitable framework for understanding Sumerian life. The word he had translated as gift also meant awakening. The word he had translated as human also meant sleeping one or unaware one. The word he translated as God meant fully conscious one, or one who was fully aware of power. Thus, a sentence that he originally translated as "the gods gave humans the gift of civilization" suddenly became "civilization emerged when humans awakened to capacities they already possessed." He went on to say that what the Sumerians called God was more likely referring to states of consciousness or modes of awareness. His announcement was not well received. His colleagues told him he was wrong because if he was right, it would invalidate his work and their work. But Kramer didn't back down. Instead, he went back to review all his own work. And when his review was finished, he was certain of what he was now seeing, that there had been a collapse of consciousness with the collapse of Sumer. The gods, quote unquote gods, were not gods as a 20th century person thought of them. They had been people whose consciousness was much more developed, much more powerful, and much broader in the topics studied and then used to build their culture and lifestyles. He noted that after Sumer collapsed in 2000 BC, the writing on the tablets suddenly shifted, and it became much less developed, more concrete, very concerned with a smaller worldview. He said Sumer had not just physically or politically collapsed, there had been a cognitive decline in the people. They no longer understood their ancestors' texts. In an interview a few weeks before he died, he stated, quote, "I think Sumer's collapse was not a political event. It was a consciousness event. Something about how they experienced reality changed. And once that change happened, they couldn't maintain their civilization." End quote. What Kramer didn't know, or perhaps couldn't get his mind around, is that the people of Sumer had several kinds of humans to do different kinds of work. It's not clear whether the people of Sumer created those humans through cloning, or if they just inherited these lesser humans from their ancestors, or simply lived among and enslaved a huge population of humans who were not very polished or civilized. Whatever the case, the number of lesser humans grew and became harder and harder to control. They were ignorant, loud, boisterous, and they did not have the consciousness of the advanced ones. When drought came and all the cities across all of Mesopotamia began collapsing, the advanced humans left. We were left to our own destiny and not expected to survive. Here we are today. We have a chance to awaken and step into advanced consciousness. We have quite an audience watching to see if it happens. Let's do it. Number 5, the Pope is making waves in the Vatican. He announced a few changes that I thought were entirely reasonable. The story is that Archangel Gabriel left a message for the time when the church would need to correct its course. The message was a reminder to break down barriers that separate people from one another and from God, a re-examination of church teachings on the role of women in ministry, a compassionate approach to divorced and remarried Catholics, greater authority for local bishops to make changes in harmony with cultural contexts, and a renewed commitment to serving the poor and marginalized people of the planet. When he announced these changes, one of the old Italian cardinals in the audience started shouting, This is heresy. This is not the doctrine of the faith. You cannot overturn 2 millennia of teaching and traditions. And what ensued was a fiery debate that raged for hours. Only a few were in support. Later that same day, Pope Leo announced that an ancient tablet was found containing a message from Archangel Gabriel. He told the crowd in St. Peter's Square what the tablet said, and he called for a return to the radical love that the church started out with. He said it called for a reawakening and that he was going to implement the reforms. Now, I don't usually pay much attention to what the Pope is doing, but this caught my eye because the controversy it has stirred reminded me of something the robes showed me. This controversy within the church is what tears it apart as we move into the future. As the Vatican shrank, so did the US government. And those two things were happening at the same time. They both ended up, the church and the government, our government, as like a microchip of what they once were. As the federal government in the US shrinks, however, the reorganization in the states grows. The number of local governing structures expands, and the fraud that ran the old government is gone. Number 6. I keep seeing a serious drought across the US this summer. It looks like it will be hot and dry for June and July and maybe even August. Last month, I mentioned that I was seeing a drought across the US, and I shared some news about the Ohio River running so low and so slow that sometimes it was interfering with drinking water in big cities, as well as shipping along both the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. Things have not gotten better. The drought has spread and worsened. The Colorado River supplies water and electrical power to farms, businesses, and 40 million Americans in Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado itself. It gets that water from snowpack. That snowpack builds up in the winter, and then it starts slowly melting in spring, filling the river and the 2 reservoirs that make life possible in the Southwest. And those are Lake Mead and Lake Powell. This year, there was 0 snowpack, and the situation is becoming more than serious. Hoover Dam has been called the beating heart of the American Southwest, but the river and the reservoirs that fed the dam slowly dropped for the last 40 years. And on April 9th, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation announced that hydroelectric power generation was being suspended indefinitely. OMG. There's water rationing in Las Vegas and Arizona. Some farms are only getting 9% of the water they need. 9%. This will make it impossible to grow their usual crops. The drought in the Southwest is projected to lose $7 billion in agricultural crops in 2026. A 2025 scientific report on analyzing tree rings shows a consistent drying trend over the last 1,000 years. It concludes that the Colorado Basin has entered an irreversible climate pattern. Desertification. The warming of the oceans has pushed the jet stream much further north into Canada, shifting the climate dramatically. Even the Great Salt Lake of Utah has lost 73% of its water. Last month, I brought up the subject because I was worrying mostly about clean water in our food supply. This month, looks like we might have to be prepared for more than just water and food shortages. The people who live in those 7 states, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, might also have to be ready for limits on electricity and a drop in the value of their homes and properties if water is not readily available. Our ability to communicate with Mother Nature and let the planet know what we need has long been lost. But perhaps it is time to remember that we are the ones who pulled out of that relationship. Maybe it's time to reconnect. Use your consciousness. Number 7, where there is drought, there is fire. It is a very good idea to put some thought into what you would do if a regional fire swept through your area. Do you know the roads? Do you have your important papers in a big envelope that you could just grab and run? What about backups for your computer data? Do you have elderly parents to consider? What about pets to consider? Children? Yeah. Do you have a bit of cash you could grab and take with you? Where would you go? We are headed into a period of droughts, fires, earthquakes, major storms, and climate alterations. Be aware and prepare. Number 8. I read an interesting article in the newspaper about the young people of today being unwilling to hold a conversation with their peers or freely express their opinions in a classroom because they fear reprisals, criticism, and even attacks from those around them who might think differently. They are censoring themselves. You know, when I read that, I was reminded of my mother. She was born in 1926, was a young girl during the Depression, and a teen during World War II. She came out of that time as a very quiet young woman who rarely shared her thoughts or spoke openly. In fact, her generation was known as the silent generation. I wonder if the self-censoring of today's young people is a common reaction to living through really hard times when kids witness the blatant struggles of the adults and they see all of those adults arguing about what is wrong, what needs to be done about it, and yet nothing constructive ever happens because no one can agree on anything and no one has any real power. Worse yet, everyone's energy is sapped by overwhelming change happening everywhere. Perhaps the conclusion those young people draw is just to keep to themselves and watch for the chance to do what they want and just forget the rest of the world. Today's young people didn't live through the Great Depression, but they lived through COVID and the lockdowns that were shocking departures from their everyday routines. They didn't live through World War II, but in its place, they're now living through the Iran war. If we cannot talk openly with one another, how will we make a world that works well for all of us? Encourage your children and grandchildren to share their thoughts and perceptions. If and when they reply, don't stop there. Ask them, what else? What do you hear others saying? How do you feel about that? Do you sometimes think they are right? What would you do if you ran the world? And similar invitations to talk. And when they talk, listen. Listen intently and respond intelligently. Be aware that you are helping to shape the intelligence, critical thinking, and development of the coming generations. Number 9. For the last month or two, I've had a feeling of something big looming in our near future, and I wondered if it had something to do with the financial system. So I asked for a picture or information that would give me some idea of what was happening with money in the next month and a half. And I saw several things, so we'll share, even though nothing seemed, like overly dramatic. The first scene I saw was of a very small rowboat, almost like a dinghy, and I was tying it up to a post at a dock on Maple Lake, which is a lake near here. When I asked why I was seeing the small boat, I suddenly heard many cries for help from people out in the water. They were struggling. Some were drowning. So I quickly untied the boat and went around picking up people. And there were other people with other little boats that were also picking up people, helping them get to shore. That scene ended. And when it did, I asked, okay, so what about the dollar? What's happening with the dollar? A new scene opened, and I saw a very heavy man with very fat thighs sitting in a dining room chair. He picked up one thigh and he put the dollar on the chair, then dropped his thigh onto it and just sat there. The fat man was well-dressed, wore a dark, like a bowler hat, and had the look of a man from the 1920s. And I had the thought that some fat ass was crushing the dollar. So I then asked, well, why? Then what? And I was shocked to see something like a slot machine suddenly begin to spill out a fountain of gold coins, as if the machine was puking out gold. So I stopped there. I stopped to think about, okay, what does all this mean? The small rowboat symbolizes people going through their daily lives, just rowing their boats as best they can, myself included. The many cries from people who are afraid they're drowning symbolizes that there may be a sudden increase in people who are in distress over money, and they will need something to lift their spirits or help ferry them to solid ground. Something will have to be done there. The fat man sitting on the dollar is really quite simple. Fat often symbolizes great wealth and can also indicate using a heavy hand to wield power. The thigh is an ancient symbol of agreement, similar to shaking hands after some kind of an agreement has been reached. This suggests that an agreement of some kind, possibly a secret agreement, has been made around the dollar, and that the dollar may be deliberately taken down or become subject to the terms of a deal in which someone who is very wealthy has all the power. The slot machine spilling out gold seems to suggest that some kind of risk or gamble pays off. And gold is flowing all over the place with coins piling up across the floor, hopefully to our benefit. And I'll mention that between the scene of the fat man with the dollar under his thigh and the slot machine with gold, there was a break of some kind. It was a very distinct break. It's hard to describe these kinds of things if you don't have these kinds of experiences. But that slot machine, let me say this again, spilling out the gold seems to suggest that some kind of risk or gamble pays off. Gold is flowing all over the place with coins piling up across the floor, hopefully to our benefit. In fact, I had the perception that I was standing in gold coins up to my knees. So All of this suggests that something happens with our financial system that a lot of people are not ready for, in spite of the fact that many alternative newscasters and podcasters have been warning about financial difficulties for the last couple of years. In summing up, the situation appears to have been deliberately caused by someone trying to crush the dollar. And because of this, some people need rescuing or help, which they get. And following the move to take down the dollar, gold comes on the scene, probably as the backing to whatever currency has been introduced. But that gold comes on as part of a gamble. Somebody gambles something big. In the past, I've heard many predictions and speculations about all of these pieces, but I've tended to, yeah, okay, nod, and then go about my business. So I always thought it best to just watch and wait while being ready for everything. But perhaps it is just as simple as what I saw. And what I was shown by the little men in brown robes was that after a period of chaos, there is no physical money anymore. It was all digital. Number 10. The Trump dog and pony show goes on, and I hope someone is documenting the chaos he is causing. It's almost impossible to follow the ups and the downs, the back and forth of what he is doing. Those who keep predicting that the war with Iran is almost over will likely be repeating that prediction regularly over the next 5 years. The war is not going to end until the cabal, deep state cabal, is defeated, done, dead, finished. The whole reason for the war is to break the ties between the cabal and Iran. Telling us Iran must not have nuclear weapons is only a plausible excuse. The real message is that the deep state must not continue to make billions and even trillions from the insurance trade on ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz and other deals involving Iran. Money is the real weapon here, and cutting off the cabal is the goal. We will continue to use war in ways the cabal does not expect, including borrowing millions in order to buy and manufacture weapons, then declaring those debts invalid later, bankrupting the City of London, which is the financial arm of the cabal, and many of those big corporations that produce weapons. Number 11. Sometimes I watch the collection of people who are sort of household names in today's world. What a gaggle of geese we have as leaders, models, and managers. Of course, there's Donald Trump, a complete enigma trying to hold the US together. Vladimir Putin is over there in Russia trying to hold Russia together. And both he and Trump are blunt and plain spoken, which absolutely confuses everyone who was raised on lies and careful propaganda. Keir Starmer in England often looks like a frightened teen who just got caught doing something illegal, probably because he was. Mark Carney in Canada reminds me of a smooth-talking used car salesman with a secret alcohol problem. Emmanuel Macron is like a rubber ducky that you play with in the bathtub and that floats over to the drain when the plug is pulled, but is just too fat to go down the drain. Georgia Maloney often looks like one of those starlets who just came off of a movie set where Psycho is being filmed. Argentina President Javier Milei strikes me as a cross between Albert Einstein's hairdresser and Robin Williams. Vladimir Zelensky comes across like a pompous, snot-nosed drug addict. Before he died, Iran's Ali Khamenei struck me as a duplicate of his predecessor, Ruhollah Khomeini. Both reminded me of priests from the Middle Ages who were out of touch with reality and who burned people at the stake. Germany's Friedrich Mayr always reminds me of a philosophy professor who has no idea how the real world works. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu strikes me as a pudgy neighborhood bully with a terrible mean streak. Netanyahu and George Bush always came across to me as a lying sack of shit, both of them. Recep Erdogan in Turkey reminds me of a very cunning priest who doesn't trust or believe anyone. He's a smart dude. Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia always impresses me as a middle-class dad selling insurance in order to make a living and take care of his family. He just comes across that way. Xi Jinping, although his nickname is Winnie the Pooh, always strikes me as a lost soul and utterly neurotic. Sanae Takaichi of Japan looks like one of those businesswomen who thinks the best way to use power is to copy men. Nicolas Maduro, before he was so unceremoniously removed from Venezuela, always struck me as a man born in the wrong century and unable to figure out where the harem and the dancing girls were. Abdel el-Sisi of Egypt reminds me of an overworked, underpaid barber harassed by a wife who wants more. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi always looked like one of those rough henchmen you see in a movie about the mafia. You know, the people who appear to be running our world are all so different, such strange individuals. Number 12. In closing, I just want to encourage you to believe in the future and understand that your consciousness is the key to the miracles you seek. Every single thing we have been taught about science, history, who we are, and the reality that we imagine ourselves to be living in, everything is not true. It is time to prepare for the truth. But I think we might need to shore one another up a little bit as the truth is revealed. So be ready. That's it for this look-see. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what is happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Reality isn't fixed. It's very dynamic. It changes. It changes according to what we're doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice, we take some kind of action, put something together, take something apart. Those are decisive actions, and they are what determine the outcome and the timeline. Of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. And that is exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what looks inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help it along. It's important to look around and assess what is happening. Where are we going? So we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for listening. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. I'll see you next month. Promises to be an interesting month. Take care.